When I lost my job, not a single person from my family offered help. They all said, "Figure it out yourself." I stayed silent. 5 years later, at a gala I hosted, their smiles vanished when they realized who owned the company sponsoring the function. I, 32M, stood at the entrance of the Grand Riverside Hotel, watching luxury cars pull up one after another. The valet attendants moved with precision, and inside, the crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors. Everything was perfect. Everything was mine. Well, not the hotel, but the event, the guest list, the power in that room. 5 years ago, I couldn't afford a decent meal. Tonight, I was the man everyone wanted to know. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years back, I was fired from my mid-level marketing position at a pharmaceutical company. The reasons were garbage, a convenient scapegoat situation when their quarterly numbers tanked. I had a mortgage, a car payment, and exactly $800 in my savings account. The panic that set in wasn't the quiet kind. It was the type that woke me up at 3 in the morning, heart racing, wondering how I'd survive the next month. I called my father first. He'd always been the practical one, the man who built his own accounting firm from scratch. Surely he'd understand. I explained the situation calmly, trying not to sound desperate. There was a long pause on the other end before he told me this was my problem to solve. He said he'd helped me enough over the years, paid for my education, given me a start. Now it was time I stood on my own 2 feet. He wished me luck and hung up. My older brother was next. He worked in finance, made 6 figures easily, drove a BMW he replaced every 2 years. I asked if he could spot me some cash, just enough to cover expenses while I job hunted. He laughed. Actually laughed. He reminded me that he had his own family to think about, his own responsibilities. Then he suggested I learn to budget better and maybe reconsider my lifestyle choices. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. My sister was the worst. She'd inherited money from our late grandmother, a substantial amount that she'd invested wisely. I thought she might be sympathetic. Instead, she told me she couldn't enable my poor planning. She said I'd always been careless with money, always lived beyond my means. She said helping me would only teach me to depend on others. She told me to figure it out myself and ended the call before I could respond. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at rejection emails from job applications, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't just hurt. It was clarity. These people, my blood relatives, the ones who posted family photos on holidays and talked about loyalty and togetherness, had abandoned me the moment I needed them. Not because they couldn't help, because they chose not to. I made a decision then. I'd survive this, but I wouldn't forget it. The job search was brutal. Months passed with nothing but automated rejections and interviews that led nowhere. My savings evaporated. I sold my car. I broke my lease and moved into a cramped studio in a rough neighborhood. I ate rice and canned beans. I applied to everything, even positions I was overqualified for. Finally, a small tech startup hired me as their marketing coordinator. The pay was terrible, barely enough to cover rent and food, but it was something. The company was run by 2 entrepreneurs who dropped out of college to chase a dream. They had brilliant ideas, but no clue how to sell them. That's where I came in. I worked 16-hour days, learned everything I could about digital marketing, social media algorithms, content strategy. I made myself indispensable. Within 6 months, I was managing their entire marketing department, which consisted of me and 1 intern. The company grew. Our user base exploded. We secured funding. The founders were smart enough to recognize talent, and they promoted me to CMO with equity options. I poured everything into that company. Every strategy, every campaign, every late night. When they were acquired by a larger corporation 2 years later, my equity was worth more than I'd made in my entire previous career. But I didn't stop there. I used that money to start consulting. I helped other startups build their brands, scale their marketing. I invested in companies I believed in. Some failed. 3 succeeded spectacularly. I learned venture capital, learned how to read balance sheets and pitch decks, learned which founders had the hunger to win. My network expanded. My wealth grew. By year 4, I'd started my own investment firm. Nothing massive, but focused and strategic. We specialized in B2B technology companies, the unsexy back-end stuff that made the digital world function. Profit margins were incredible. We acquired a majority stake in a mid-sized software company that provided enterprise solutions. Within a year, I was sitting on the board. Within 18 months, I was CEO. My family had no idea. I kept my distance after those phone calls, attending only mandatory events like funerals or milestone birthdays. I was polite but distant, never sharing details about my life. They assumed I was scraping by, probably because I still drove a modest car and didn't flash money around. My father once asked what I was doing for work, and I told him I was in tech. He nodded dismissively and changed the subject. That suited me fine. Let them think whatever they wanted. The gala was my sister's idea, though she didn't know it yet. She'd been appointed to the board of a prestigious charity, one that funded educational programs for underprivileged kids. Good cause, great PR for wealthy donors. She'd been bragging about it on social media for months, posting pictures from planning meetings, talking about the upcoming fundraising event. The charity needed corporate sponsors, big ones, to make their annual gala successful. My company stepped in with the largest donation they'd received in their history. $500,000, plus covering all event costs. The charity was ecstatic. They offered prominent recognition, speaking opportunities, whatever we wanted. I kept my involvement quiet, working through my COO for all communications. The charity board knew our company name, but hadn't connected it to me. Why would they? I'd kept my personal life separate from my professional identity. The invitation went out to my family like it did to all major donors and board members. Black tie, premium catering, silent auction. My sister posted about it constantly, thrilled to be hosting such an important event. My father mentioned he'd be attending, proud his daughter was doing such meaningful work. My brother confirmed he'd be there with his wife, said it was good for networking. None of them knew I'd be there too. None of them knew what was coming. I arrived early, checked the setup, confirmed everything was perfect. The ballroom looked spectacular. Our company logo was displayed prominently on screens, banners, even the programs. The charity director thanked me profusely, said this event wouldn't be possible without our generosity. I smiled and told her it was our pleasure to support such important work. Guests started arriving around 7. I positioned myself near the bar, watching. My father appeared first, distinguished in his tuxedo, chatting with other businessmen. My brother came next with his wife, both looking polished and successful. Then my sister arrived, radiant in a designer gown, working the room like a politician. They didn't notice me immediately. I was just another face in a crowd of wealthy donors. I waited, nursing a whiskey, letting the anticipation build. The charity director took the stage around 8, welcomed everyone, thanked them for coming. She talked about their mission, the children they'd helped, the programs they'd funded. Then she moved to acknowledgments, recognizing various donors and sponsors. She saved the biggest for last. She talked about our company, the incredible generosity, the transformative impact of our donation. She asked me to come to the stage to say a few words. I set down my drink and walked through the crowd. That's when my sister saw me. Her face went confused first, then shocked as she processed what was happening. I took the microphone, thanked the charity for their work, talked briefly about the importance of education and opportunity. I kept it professional, gracious. No need for dramatics. The truth was dramatic enough. When I finished, applause filled the room. I returned to my spot near the bar. My sister approached first, her smile brittle and confused. She asked what I was doing here, why I was on stage. I explained calmly that my company was the primary sponsor. Her expression went from confusion to disbelief. She asked what company, what was I talking about? I handed her my business card. CEO and founder. She stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. My brother appeared next, having heard part of the conversation. He looked at the card in my sister's hand, then at me. He asked how this was possible. When did this happen? I told him it had been happening for 5 years, ever since I lost my job and had to figure things out myself. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. My father joined the group, confused by the tension. My sister showed him the card. I watched his face process the information, the wheels turning. He asked if this was some kind of joke. I assured him it wasn't. Our company had 40 employees, managed over $200 million in assets, and was projected to double revenue next year. All very real. The silence was exquisite. My brother recovered first, his finance brain immediately calculating. He started talking about investment opportunities, how we should discuss potential partnerships. I told him my investment team handled all that. He could submit a proposal through proper channels. His smile faltered. My sister tried a different approach. She talked about how proud she was, how amazing this was, how the family should celebrate. I thanked her politely, but noted we hadn't had much to celebrate together in recent years. She flinched. My father, ever the pragmatist, asked why I hadn't told them. I took a sip of my drink before answering. I reminded him that 5 years ago, I'd called asking for help, and he'd told me to handle it myself. I'd done exactly that. I'd built something from nothing, alone, without family support or involvement. There hadn't seemed much point in sharing details with people who made it clear they weren't interested in helping during the hard times. He started to say something, probably a defense or justification, but I cut him off gently. I told him I wasn't angry, not anymore. I'd actually learned valuable lessons from that experience. I'd learned who I could count on, which turned out to be myself. I'd learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Most importantly, I'd learned that the only person responsible for my success or failure was me. My brother tried to laugh it off, said we all had misunderstandings sometimes. Families were complicated. I agreed families were indeed complicated. That's why I'd kept my professional life separate. Less complicated that way. The charity director interrupted, pulling me away to meet other donors. I excused myself from my family, relieved to escape. The rest of the evening was a blur of handshakes, small talk, and business cards. Several board members wanted to discuss future partnerships. A venture capitalist asked about my investment strategy. A journalist requested an interview about our company's growth. My family kept their distance, huddled together, occasionally glancing my way. I could imagine the conversation. The recalculations happening, the regrets forming, the realization that they'd badly misjudged the situation years ago. The event ended around 11. As guests filed out, my sister approached one final time. She looked tired, her earlier confidence deflated. She said we should talk, really talk, as a family. I told her I was flying to Singapore in 2 days for business, but we could schedule something when I returned. She nodded, looking small despite her expensive gown. My brother shook my hand stiffly, said congratulations, his voice hollow. My father simply looked at me for a long moment before walking away without a word. I left the hotel and drove home to my penthouse apartment overlooking the river. The same river visible from that cramped studio I'd lived in 5 years ago, just a different view. I poured myself a drink and stood on the balcony, watching the city lights. The revenge I'd imagined during those dark months of unemployment had been loud, confrontational, designed to hurt. But this quiet revelation of success achieved without them, their realization that they'd abandoned someone who became exactly what they claimed to value, this was so much better. I didn't need their approval anymore. Didn't need their support or validation. I'd figured it out myself, just like they'd told me to. Update 1. The days following the gala were strange. My phone, which had been blissfully free of family contact for years, suddenly wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages, calls, voicemails. My sister wanted to meet for coffee. My brother suggested lunch to discuss business opportunities. My father left a voicemail saying we should talk when I had time. I ignored most of it. I had actual work to do. We were closing a major acquisition, and I was needed in Singapore for negotiations. I left the country 2 days later as planned. Singapore was productive. The deal closed successfully, adding another revenue stream to our portfolio. But even there, halfway around the world, my family's presence lingered. My sister sent long emails about how she'd been thinking about our relationship, how she wanted to reconnect. My brother forwarded investment proposals, suddenly very interested in my professional opinion. I responded to none of it. When I returned 3 weeks later, my assistant informed me that my father had called the office multiple times. Persistent, at least. I finally agreed to meet him for dinner at a quiet restaurant downtown. He arrived exactly on time, still carrying himself with that rigid posture that suggested control even when he had none. We ordered, made small talk about the food, the weather, anything but the obvious tension between us. Finally, he addressed it. He said he'd been thinking about our last conversation, about what happened 5 years ago. He wanted to explain his position, wanted me to understand his reasoning. He believed I needed to learn independence, needed to face consequences, needed to grow up. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him a simple question. Had it worked? Had his refusal to help taught me valuable lessons about independence? He seemed encouraged, said yes, clearly it had. Look at what I'd accomplished. I leaned back, considered my response carefully. I told him he was partially right. I had learned independence. But I'd also learned something he probably hadn't intended. I'd learned that family was optional. That blood relation meant nothing without actual support and care. That I could build a successful, fulfilling life without them in it. His face went pale. He started to protest, to say that wasn't what he meant, that family was important. I agreed family could be important, but I'd built my own family now. Colleagues I trusted, friends who'd supported me, mentors who'd invested in my growth when my actual relatives wouldn't. He asked if I was cutting them off completely. I told him I wasn't cutting anyone off. They were welcome to attend the same events I did, to be cordial at gatherings. But the relationship had fundamentally changed 5 years ago, and there was no going back. I wasn't interested in rebuilding something that had been so easily discarded. We finished dinner in near silence. He picked up the check, probably out of habit. I let him. My sister was next, showing up at my office unannounced. My assistant tried to stop her, but she pushed through, determined. She sat across from my desk, eyes red from crying. She launched into an apology, said she'd been awful, said she regretted everything. She wanted another chance, wanted to be part of my life again. I asked her why. Why now, after 5 years of distance? Why after seeing my success at the gala? She insisted it wasn't about the money, wasn't about my company. She genuinely missed me, missed having a brother. The words sounded rehearsed, desperate. I told her the truth as I saw it. If I'd remained broke, struggling, barely surviving, would she be sitting in my office right now? Would she have reached out, tried to reconnect? We both knew the answer. She left crying. Part of me felt guilty. A smaller part felt vindicated. My brother never apologized. Instead, he tried to leverage our relationship for business. He kept sending investment opportunities, asking for introductions to my network, suggesting partnerships. When I finally agreed to meet him, he spent an hour pitching me on a fund he was starting, how family should invest in family. I declined politely but firmly. I explained that my investment decisions were based on returns and strategy, not personal relationships. If he wanted my firm's investment, he could submit a formal proposal like anyone else. It would be evaluated on merit alone. He looked genuinely shocked that I wouldn't just hand him money because we shared DNA. 3 months after the gala, things settled into a new normal. My family stopped calling constantly. The desperate attempts to reconnect faded. We existed in the same city, sometimes attended the same events, but the distance between us was clear. I won't pretend it didn't hurt sometimes. Late nights in my empty apartment, I'd wonder if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. But then I'd remember that phone call 5 years ago, my father's cold dismissal, my brother's laughter, my sister's lecture about personal responsibility. They taught me well. I'd figured it out myself. Built something extraordinary from nothing. And I'd done it without them. That was its own kind of freedom.